Okay, so where was I? I was describing to you the bare outlines, and I'd mentioned to you the fact that they grew up under Drona and Bhishma, right? And the Kauravas are the ones who are ambitious to uh, rule the kingdom. Now, you could say the story begins with uh, an act of weakness on the part of Yudhishthir. When I say the story, I'm talking about now getting into the real core of what is going to be the Mahabharata. All right, um, and that is that. So one of the main characters is Shakuni. Shakuni is this uncle, and the story makes it very clear that for many reasons he holds grudges against the Pandavas, and he decides that he's going to aid the Kauravas, and he's particularly close to Duryodhan. Duryodhan is, remember, the oldest of the Kauravas, um, and so he knows that Yudhishthir has a fatal weakness for gambling. Right? He likes to play dice, and so he suggests to Duryodhan, who has been scheming for a way to be able to win the kingdom, been looking for a way to win the kingdom. So he suggests to Duryodhan, why don't you invite Yudhishthir and his brothers to a round of dice and continue to increase the stakes. Uh, and Shakuni himself is a skilled dice player, so he tells Duryodhan that I'm going to be able to get the upper hand at each and every round of this game. So an invitation is sent to Yudhishthir and the Pandavas, and even though Yudhishthir is advised that there's something which is not quite right about the invitation, that he should be very cautious, there's some kind of plot or scheme behind it, but he says that, look, an invitation is sent to me in good faith, I need to accept this invitation. And so he and his brothers, they go and depart for Hastinapur, which is the capital of the Kauravas. The Pandavas' capital is Indraprasth, and they arrive there and they start the dice game. Now, this dice game is going to lead to what will then become the story. Because at the dice game, when they start rolling the dice, Yudhishthir loses the first round, the second round, the third round. And with each round, the stakes are higher. So, for example, can you hear me properly?
It just froze for a minute, but now it's come back.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't tell you what's, I just received a little sign on my computer saying the internet connection is unstable, but, you know, I think, again, it may have to do with a very heavy demand. So essentially, with each round of it, the stakes get higher. So he bets the jewels that he has, the horses in his stable, the elephants, etc., etc. The dice game goes on for hours and hours, and the Pandavas lose all their wealth, their kingdom, all of that. Okay, nothing is left at the end of it, and Yudhishthira says, "Well, there's really nothing left now. There's nothing for me." And then Shakuni and Duryodhan say, "No, there's still plenty left. There's yourself, and there's Bhim, and there's Arjun, and there's Nakul, and there's Sahadev. You can bet each one of them." The meaning of put them up as stakes would be that if Yudhishthira loses the round again and he has bet Nakul, then it means that Nakul becomes a slave of the Kauravas. And same thing with Sahadev, and likewise with himself and his brothers. And then there's Draupadi, because she still is legally married to the five brothers. I'll get to that story of how that happened later on. Okay? All right. So, because like, this is really, as I said, the main story in a sense that's going to precipitate the action. All right. So now what I'm uh, uh, want to suggest here very simply is this. Uh, can you see me, by the way? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. So what I want to suggest here very simply is this, that this wager has to be viewed. Okay, and we will get to that at a little point later on, because at the moment I just want to give you the outlines of the story. But the wager itself is very interesting. It is what we might call the improbable wager. All right. I mean, it's the most unusual kind of wager or risk that you take, and very often you need something like this to precipitate something that is going to be catastrophic. If you've ever seen the Hindi film Lagan, I don't know if you have, but Lagan also has a kind of an improbable wager. All right, think of it. And in fact, actually, Lagan is very much sort of cast in the mode of the Mahabharata, if I may say so. Okay, that's one of the thousands of Hindi films that has evidently drawn on the Mahabharata, on the store of the encyclopedic lore and store that is called the Mahabharata. Now, uh, the what happens in this wager is that he's going to end up losing himself and all his brothers and Draupadi. And the loss of Draupadi is an extraordinary scene in the Mahabharata, has been subjected to endless discussion, you know. Okay, but we'll come to that again momentarily, because I want to finish the outline of the story. So once everything has been lost, then the elders there have a discussion, because of course it is a catastrophic scene where Yudhishthira and his brothers and Draupadi have all reduced to being slaves. Well, you might say the story could have ended there, because after all, what the Kauravas desired was to win the kingdom and to humiliate their cousins, because throughout they had always felt that they were being greatly humiliated by the Pandavas. Duryodhana had this sense of grievance throughout, right? You could say well, that's the end of the story. It happened to be the misfortune, but of course it's not, because this is where the Mahabharata becomes very complicated, because the Mahabharata says that in a way everything has been predetermined. All right, so you'll have to think about the moral framework here. The moral framework is, what is the nature of human free will, nature of human agency? And on the other hand, are things determined beforehand? So it was, in a manner of speaking, determined that things should be this way, but it was also determined that this would not be the outcome. Why wouldn't it be the outcome? Because then the elders have a discussion and they say that, look, this is not good for the kingdom to see these 5 noble princes reduced to such a state. Is something that we cannot. Okay, even if we think that the dice game did not involve any cheating and treachery, which it did. We know Shakuni is not just a master gambler; he's a master cheater. The text makes it very clear. So he clearly cheated. All right, he deceived Yudhishthira. But part of being a master gambler is that you can disguise the deceit. All right, so to some it appears that, well, Yudhishthira lost, and that's how it is. But on the other hand, no one wants to see these 5 noble princes reduced to such dire straits. So what is agreed upon is that they will go off into a period of exile. Okay, and this would be the punishment. They're going to go into a period of exile for 13 years. The 13th year has to be incognito, that is, that they cannot be discovered by anyone. And people cannot say, here are the 5 Pandavas, okay, wherever they might be, because if they are discovered during this 13th year of exile, then they will have to undergo another 12 years of exile. If they're not discovered, they come back, then they can rightfully claim half of the kingdom as their own. So the kingdom would then be divided. And of course, one of the reasons the war is going to take place, because it does turn out that they spent 13 years in exile, and the 13th year they are successful in spending that year of exile incognito. That is, without being discovered, without being revealed, without their identities being revealed. So at the end of the 13th year, they come back and they want to claim it as their own. But Duryodhana, who has been dreading this moment, anticipating that they may come back, he has already decided at that moment that he is going to actually go for an all-out war. All right. And so this is what the Mahabharata is going to be. It's going to be this all-out war that is going to be fought between the two. Of course, the other important character there that we have to bring into the picture, there are many other important characters, but some of them can come into the picture later on, but not Krishna, because Krishna is the person who is presiding over all of this. In what sense? He's presiding over all of this in the sense that he is the cosmic being. He is a transcendent being. However, he plays the role of a charioteer. So he's actually driving Arjun's chariot. And recall that one part of the Mahabharata, a minuscule portion of the Mahabharata, is the Bhagavad Gita, where we had seen, consisting only of 700 shlokas, 700 verses. All right. And it tells you how small the text is, because remember that the Mahabharata as a whole is somewhere between 75,000 to 100,000 shlokas. The Gita is 700 verses. So this portion of the Gita, you see, of course, Krishna in his most famous role there, but Krishna is present throughout. He's present throughout. So he is going to be on the side of the Pandavas, and in return, as it were, Duryodhana is going to get a massive army, because you might remember that I had mentioned to you in passing an episode before in another context where Duryodhana was offered the choice of whether he wanted Krishna or whether he wanted all the armies that Krishna could make available to him. And Duryodhana said, "I'll take all the men that you have." All right. So this war is going to be an all-out war. The text itself says, sorry?
Does this war happen after the exile, or?
Yeah, at the end of the exile, The 13 years of exile are over, and when the Pandavas want to claim, okay, because they have fulfilled their end of the obligation, because when they were deprived of everything, that rather than being humiliated in this particular fashion where they become slaves of the Kauravas and everything, the elders are able to persuade Duryodhana and the Kauravas that, look, let the Pandavas go into exile. You'll have 13 years of peace, and 13 years is enough time for you to sort of get contentment, build up your own kingdom and all of that, right? And at the end of the 13 years, the Pandavas will come back under the terms of this agreement, and then they will split the kingdom. But Duryodhana decides that no, at the end of the 13th year, when the Pandavas come back to reclaim what is theirs, he decides that he doesn't want to part with it. He doesn't want to share the kingdom. He doesn't want to split the duties of the king. All right. And instead, there is going to be an all-out war. All right. So this is the bare outlines of the story. And then substantial portions of the Mahabharata, of course, are given over to a description of this great war. What are the episodes on it? How did the armies get decimated? At the end of it, nearly everyone is wiped out. All the Kauravas are wiped out. All their armies are wiped out. But all of the Pandavas are humbled in their own way. See, the text is unequivocally clear. There is no such thing as an outright victory. There never is. In fact, Yudhishthira at the end of the war says, this victory does not feel like victory at all. But to understand what he means by that and why he arrives at this sentiment, we have to go back and now look at some of the issues arising from the study of the Mahabharata and some of the stories. All right. So before I get into some more particular considerations and start looking at some of the stories of it, I want to pause and see if you have any questions.
A couple questions, but I have about 10 minutes. And I guess anything more we want to discuss on this, which of course would be very interesting. Maybe we can do a little bit next session in addition to whatever else we're doing.
Okay, you have only 10 more minutes right now, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So in that case, what I want to do is I want to give you a couple of the stories. and then we'll have to look at if you want, because I can easily do one more session on this, especially if you're working on a film or something of that kind, because you might need some more ideas to play around with. But let me give you some of the stories, and the story that actually I'll take up is the story of Ashwatthama. All right, because the story of Ashwatthama actually illustrates some of the subtleties of the text. One of the fundamental things about the Mahabharata. So if somebody asked you, what is the subject matter of the Mahabharata in one word, there is an answer to that. The answer is dharma. It is essentially a work about dharma, which in this case means law, morality, conduct. It means, if you're looking at the Mahabharata in particular, and you're looking at the characters, then you're saying, well, what was the dharma of a warrior? Okay, what is the dharma of a Brahmin? But let's broaden it out. What is the basis of moral action? What is the basis of ethical thinking? How does one know whether the decision that one has made is correct or not? If one is placed in a moral quandary, how does one determine the ethical basis of one's action at that period of time? So the text tells you repeatedly that dharma is very subtle. It's very subtle. It's slippery. Okay, shukshma. That's the word. It's very fine grained. It's so fine grained. It's like a muslin cloth, right? It's so fine grained. That is that there are shades and shades, and sometimes it's difficult to determine what is the correct basis of action. So how is this illustrated through the story of Ashwatthama? So one of the major characters is Drona. Drona was the teacher of the Pandavas and the Kauravas. So he's one of the elders. He's the preceptor, and he's a master in the arts of warfare. Now, the elders, when the war breaks out, they are all going to side with the Kauravas. They're going to side with the Kauravas. And there are lots of reasons for that. It's not because they're necessarily persuaded that the Kauravas have a correct moral claim and that their claim is better than the claim of the Pandavas. That's not the case. But, everyone grew up in the court of the Kauravas. And for reasons of contingency, familiarity, expediency, all of these reasons, Drona and Bhishma and all of the elders, the wise men, they all decide that they're going to side with the Kauravas. Now, while the battle is taking place, somewhere on the 8th or 9th day, I forget exactly when, the Pandavas become very despondent. They're full of despair. And they're full of despair because they find that Drona is such a ferocious warrior and so disciplined and so meticulous that he's tearing apart the Pandava army. And they realize that if they don't kill Drona, they're not going to be able to win the war. The question is, how do they distract Drona? Because he's such a disciplined warrior, they can't defeat him in a battle. They can't really defeat him in a battle. So they're going to have to use some subterfuge. Okay, so at the end of each day's fighting, there's always a council. The Pandavas get together, just like the Kauravas get together with their, great warriors, and each council then strategizes. Okay, what do we do the next day? Who's going to be the main warrior? What weapons is he going to use? What kind of battle formation do we have, etc. So the Pandavas are discussing this, and it is suggested that the only way that Drona can be killed is if he is distracted. He's a yogi. He's a very disciplined man. Now, the question, of course, that begs the question, how is he going to be distracted? Well, he will get distracted if he is told that his son Ashwatthama has been killed. Ashwatthama is also a ferocious fighter, and Drona is devoted to his son. So people realize that it's like the weakness that he has. He's so devoted to his son that if he loses his son, or if he thinks he's lost his son, that will make him despondent, full of despair. And at that moment of distraction, he can be killed. because because he's no longer fighting with the kind of discipline that he needs. But this begs the question: Ashwatthama is very much alive. How do you tell Drona that his son Ashwatthama has been killed? Right. So the Krishna suggests, and this is where Krishna comes in. Okay, suggests that if Yudhishthir tells Drona that your son has been killed, Drona will believe him, because Yudhishthir has a reputation as someone who embodies truth. He never lies. He never lies. Remember, his Yudhishthir's other name. He's Dharma. He's Dharma himself. And that's the other name by which he's known. So Yudhishthir says, but I can't do that. I can't utter a lie. Okay. And while they're having this discussion, it is mentioned that there happens to be an elephant by the same name of Ashwatthama. So remember, Ashwatthama is the name of the son of Drona, but Ashwatthama is also the name of an elephant. And so it is then suggested at this meeting that Ashwatthama, the elephant, should be killed. Okay, and then Yudhishthira can tell Drona Ashwatthama has been killed. All right. So they discuss this, and finally Yudhishthira agrees. Although again the text suggests a certain degree of ambivalence. Why does it suggest a certain degree of ambivalence? It's obvious, because the question here really has to do with the not whether a proposition is true in itself, but also the intent with which the proposition is being told. And of course, in this case, one can question whether the proposition is true or not, because of course there is Ashwatthama the son and there is Ashwatthama the elephant, and Yudhishthira realizes this. So what does Yudhishthira do? What he does is he goes and tells Drona, Ashwatthama the elephant has been killed. Right? He says the word the elephant, but in a much lower tone. And the rest of the sentence, so Ashwatthama, the elephant, has been killed. Now, when Drona hears it, he doesn't hear the elephant part. He only hears Ashwatthama has been killed, and the results that follow are exactly what the Pandavas had anticipated, which is that he's so despondent that he loses sight of what he is doing, loses his capacity for battle effectively, and Drona is going to be killed at this point. So now this is where the Mahabharata compels us to ask, how do we evaluate the moral basis of this action? You see, there are 3 or 4 different positions you can take here. One position you can take here is, let's begin with the extreme realist view. The extreme realist view is all is fair in love and war. You've heard that expression. If you have to win a war, you win the war by all means necessary. There are no limits, there are no constraints, there's no such thing as moral action, that all the rules of moral conduct are suspended at the time of war, and therefore it doesn't matter with what intention Yudhishthira said what. Drona has been killed, a victory has been achieved, this is what matters. That's the extreme realist view. The other view, on the other end, the extreme view would be that this was unquestionably an act of deception. It was an act of deception. And this view would be the view that means matter. How you achieve the end matter. If the means are corrupt, the end will be corrupted. And you could say that, by the way, that the Mahabharata is a demonstration of that. Why is it a demonstration of that? Because when you get to the end, you're going to find that not only are all the Kauravas killed, of course, well, that's it, that's par for the course, but no, all the Pandavas are themselves eventually going to suffer in various ways. Okay, there's the last one of the last allegorical scenes is they climb up the mountain, as it were, to what you might describe as paradise. None of them reaches it. They keep on falling along the way. Okay, and Krishna himself, the all-knowing God, he dies a very humble death. For someone who is a god, how does he get killed? He gets killed because one day he's in the forest, and a hunter mistakes him for a deer from a distance, shoots an arrow, and kills Krishna. And his entire clan is wiped out. I mean, the Mahabharata tells you how Krishna's entire clan is wiped out. All right. So the view at the other end is means.
Krishna, despite being a god or godlike,
Yes.
he is killed at the end of the Mahabharata.
Absolutely. But of course, the question is, what is the exact role that he's playing? That he's God or godlike, but he also is the driver, the charioteer for Arjuna. And we would have to have a real assessment of the whole character of Krishna in the Mahabharata. All right. But let us not move away from the fundamental question here, which is that I've given you the two extreme interpretations, both of which I think you will see can be plausible and certainly have been held to be the case historically in conflicts all the time by people, and then their positions in between. Because you could say that Yudhishthir said Ashwatthama has been killed. That proposition alone is true. An elephant by the name of Ashwatthama had been killed. But then you could say that, well, there are two ways in which we have to modify whether it's really true or not. One of which is that it's only partially true because, yes, the pronoun describes, the name describes here who was killed, but clearly the subject of that action was not the one that was intended to be conveyed to Drona, right? And the other reading over here very clearly is that, in fact, actually, Yudhishthir himself was aware of the deception that he was engaged in, and was trying to console himself by adding this phrase in a lower register, hoping that Drona would not hear that part of it, and that is exactly what happened. So Ashwatthama, the elephant, has been killed. Okay, and then of course, if you're a philosopher of language, you ask yourself, well, what is the nature of speech? How does one evaluate speech? When does speech become something that it doesn't seem to be? And what are the complexities of a statement? Because you say the statement with a certain intent. The question is, how is it received? Right? How is it received by the other person? It's a fabulous illustration of the complexities that philosophers of language have worked on for hundreds of years. What do we mean when we say something? How do we interpret what we mean? How do we even interpret what we say? What is a particular arrangement of words in a sentence, and what kind of truth effect does that arrangement actually create? It is also a wonderful illustration of what the Mahabharata describes as the subtlety or slipperiness of dharma. In other words, was Yudhishthir correct in doing what he did? Should we exonerate him? Or is it the case that actually he was adharmic? That is, that he did not displace the characteristics of one who subscribes to the law of dharma. And of course, if Yudhishthir doesn't, what are we going to expect of the lesser characters in the Mahabharata, right? You see, one of the most extraordinary things about the Mahabharata, I mean, and here, this is just one story. I've got 10 other stories that I want to really share with you. But one of the most extraordinary things about the Mahabharata is that every hero has an element of the anti-hero, the element of the anti-self. He's not being his self. He is, because usually a hero is someone we hold up. Remember, in English, we make a difference between the hero and the villain. Who's the hero of the story? The hero is a good guy and the villain is a bad guy. In the Mahabharata, there are no unadulterated heroes or villains. Even the villains have something of the good within them, and the heroes have something of the wicked within them. Both the heroes and villains have something of the gods and demons within them, just like demons have something godly about them, and just as gods have something that is demon-like about them. You see, it's a continuum. It is a continuum. In our worldview, in the Indic civilization, as embodied particularly in the Mahabharata, the continuum is gods at the top, all right? Then you might get sort of the semi gods, if I may put it this way. Then you get the mortals, mere mortals who, however, are superior human beings. Then you get those who are not so good, people who are wicked, and then you get the asuras. The asuras are the demons, right? But these are not all discrete categories. This is a continuum. And one slides into the other. This is what you're going to see in the Mahabharata throughout. All right, so this is essentially the story of Ashwatthama. Now, do we have time for anything else? Or because you had said 10 minutes, and I think that